Imagine getting a phone call that your brother's truck, missing for 2 years, was just found buried 12 feet underground, 1,500 miles from where he vanished. Before we dive into this absolutely insane story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me, would you keep searching for a missing family member even after everyone else gave up? Because what you're about to hear will change how you think about the open road forever. Danny Rollins was checking tire pressure at a truck stop in Amarillo when his phone rang. Montana area code, unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something made him pick up, and those next few words would turn his entire world upside down. The voice on the other end belonged to Officer Lisa Hartwell from the Stillwater County Sheriff's Department, and she had news that seemed impossible. They'd found Jake's truck, Danny's brother, missing for 2 years without a trace, and his 18-wheeler had just been discovered by a construction crew breaking ground for an oil pipeline. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. The truck wasn't abandoned on some back road. It wasn't sitting in an impound lot. It was buried. Deliberately. 12 feet underground in rural Montana. Danny's wrench clattered to the pavement. For 2 years, he'd driven every route Jake might have taken. He'd called every dispatcher, checked every truck stop, never stopped looking. And now this. Officer Hartwell's voice was careful, measured, like she was trying to soften a blow that couldn't be softened. The truck was empty, but there were bullet holes. Multiple shots through the windshield and driver's side door. Danny felt his knees go weak. Jake's last words to him echoed in his memory, casual and confident. Just a quick run to Oklahoma City, little brother. Be back Thursday night. Save me some of Mom's cornbread. That was March of 2021. Jake never made it back. Now here's what makes this even more disturbing. Officer Hartwell said something that sent chills down Danny's spine. This isn't just about your brother anymore. What we're finding at this site, it's bigger than one missing trucker. 3 hours later, Danny was pushing his rig north, foot heavy on the accelerator, chasing answers that had been buried in Montana dirt for 2 long years. His CB radio was alive with chatter, the usual complaints about fuel prices and inspection stations, but Danny couldn't focus on any of it. His mind kept circling back to one question. How does a routine delivery from Texas to Oklahoma City end with a bullet-riddled truck buried in Montana? He grabbed his CB mic and put out a call, asking if anyone remembered Jake Rollins, if anyone knew anything about that last run. A driver named Smokestack Joe came back on the radio, and what he said made Danny's blood run cold. About 6 months before Jake disappeared, there'd been chatter about independent drivers getting squeezed by new players. People offering rates that seemed too good to be true for rush deliveries. And here's the thing. Drivers who took those loads started acting different. Nervous, scared. Joe's final words before signing off were a warning. Whatever happened to Jake, it wasn't no accident, and if they buried his truck, they buried it for a reason. When Danny finally reached the sheriff's department in Montana, Officer Hartwell was waiting. She was younger than he expected, with tired eyes that had clearly seen too much. She led him to a small conference room, and that's when Danny saw it. Jake's CB radio, sitting in a clear evidence bag. The same Cobra 29 that Jake had saved up for months to buy. Hartwell explained they'd pulled it from the cab, and the last transmission was logged at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th, 2021, the night Jake disappeared. Then she pressed play on a recorder, and Danny heard his brother's voice for the first time in 2 years. The terror in Jake's tone was something Danny had never heard before. Mayday, Mayday. This is Jake Rollins in a white Peterbilt on Interstate 35 northbound. I got a situation here. Someone's in my cab who shouldn't be. The next words made Danny's vision blur. If anyone's listening, tell my brother Danny that they forced me to do this. Tell him I'm sorry. Then nothing but static. Danny's hands were shaking. Someone had forced Jake to do something. But what and why? Officer Hartwell asked the obvious questions. Did Jake have enemies? Money troubles? Danny shook his head. His brother was clean, never touched drugs, barely drank. He was just trying to save enough to buy his own rig, maybe start a small operation. Nothing that would get him killed. That night, Danny couldn't sleep. He lay in a cheap motel room outside Billings, staring at water stains on the ceiling, replaying that transmission over and over. Someone's in my cab who shouldn't be. They forced me to do this. At 6 a.m., Hartwell picked him up, and they drove 20 minutes into rolling hills dotted with oil derricks and construction equipment. When Danny first saw the excavation site, his stomach dropped. There, sitting at the bottom of a massive pit, was Jake's white Peterbilt. From a distance, it looked almost pristine. But as they got closer, Danny could see the spider web of bullet holes across the windshield, the jagged tears in the driver's side door where high-caliber rounds had punched through steel. At least 12 entry points, Hartwell said quietly. Whoever did this wanted to make sure your brother couldn't drive away. Danny climbed down into the pit, his boots slipping on red Montana clay. Up close, the damage was even worse. The passenger seat was shredded, dark stains on the sleeper berth that could only be blood. But there were no human remains in the truck. That should have been a relief, but somehow it made everything worse. Where was Jake? Then Hartwell showed Danny something that changed everything. She led him around to the back of the trailer and opened the cargo doors. The interior had been completely gutted and rebuilt. Where there should have been loading space, someone had installed a false floor with hidden compartments underneath. Professional-grade modifications for drug smuggling. Danny crawled inside the trailer, running his hands along the fake floor panels. The craftsmanship was incredible. You'd never know the compartments existed unless you knew exactly where to look. Jake didn't know about this, Danny said, his voice echoing in the empty space. He would have told me. We talked about everything. Hartwell believed him. Based on the radio transmission and the physical evidence, it looked like Jake had been forced to transport drugs without his knowledge. When he discovered what was happening, they killed him. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Hartwell led Danny to the far edge of the pit, where the construction crew had uncovered a concrete foundation buried even deeper than the truck. It was the remains of a drug processing facility. Industrial-grade equipment, chemical residue, the works, and they'd found personal effects. Driver's licenses, wallets, CB radios from at least 6 different truckers over the past 5 years. Danny felt the blood drain from his face. Jake wasn't the first driver they'd forced into this operation, and based on what they were finding, he probably wasn't the last. One of the crime scene techs called them over, holding up an evidence bag. They'd found something wedged under the truck's fuel tank, deliberately hidden. It was a small digital recorder, the cheap kind truckers used to log their hours. The plastic was cracked and dirty, but the LED display still showed battery charge. Danny recognized it immediately. That's Jake's. He always kept one running in case the DOT checked his logs. If Jake had hidden this recorder before he died, it might contain evidence. Names, locations, conversations, everything they needed to find whoever killed him. Back at the sheriff's department, they handed the recorder to Tommy, a young computer forensics expert who extracted about 40 hours of audio from the weeks before Jake disappeared. Most of it was routine, CB chatter, engine noise, phone calls home. But then Tommy pulled up a conversation that made Danny's fists clench. The recording was from a truck stop in Gainesville, Texas, 3 days before Jake vanished. Someone had approached him with an offer. Just one run, Dallas to Oklahoma City. Take a small detour, pick up some extra cargo, $5,000 cash, no questions asked. Jake's response was firm. He wasn't interested in rushed deliveries without paperwork. The other voice was smooth but insistent, heavily accented. Nothing dangerous, just some packages that need to travel quietly. You understand? Jake's answer was clear. No, I don't understand, and I'm not interested. There was the sound of a truck door slamming. But here's the thing, Jake started, recording every interaction after that conversation, like he knew something was wrong. The next file was from March 15th, the day Jake disappeared. This time the audio was muffled, like the recorder was hidden. Jake's voice was tense as he spoke, and what he said next would break Danny's heart. Danny, if you're hearing this, something happened to me. That guy from Gainesville came back. He's got friends now, and they're not taking no for an answer. The sound of truck doors opening, multiple voices shouting. They're saying I don't have a choice anymore, that they know where Mom lives, where you run your routes. They've been watching us, Danny. They know everything. Then a new voice cut through, cold and authoritative. Enough talking, driver. You're going to take our cargo to Oklahoma City. Then you're going to make some new stops. And if you even think about calling the police, your family dies first. The recording went silent for a moment before Jake's voice came back, barely a whisper. They added stuff to my trailer. Drugs, I think. Lots of it. They've got a whole operation. Trucks coming and going. Guys with guns everywhere. It's not just about one delivery. They're moving product all over the country. Highway noise in the background as Jake drove through the night. I'm trying to remember everything. License plates, faces, names. There's a guy they call Santos who's running things. And Danny, there are cops involved. I saw badges, patrol cars. These people have protection. Jake's voice cracked then. I'm going to try to get evidence. Try to record everything before they decide I know too much. If something happens to me, you find these people. You make them pay for what they did to all those other drivers. Static, then nothing. Danny wiped his eyes, not caring who saw. Officer Hartwell leaned forward, her expression grim. Your brother mentions other drivers and corrupt cops. We need to figure out who he was talking about. Then her radio crackled with an urgent call. The construction crew had found another vehicle at the excavation site. They needed the coroner. When they arrived back at the site, the scene had transformed into something that looked like a war zone. Yellow tape surrounded an area twice the size of the original dig. They'd found 2 more vehicles, a pickup truck that had been buried for about 3 years and a sedan that looked even older, maybe 5 years underground. Both vehicles contained skeletal remains, multiple homicides. The crime scene tech confirmed. This was where they disposed of anyone who wouldn't cooperate. Danny felt sick. Jake's words echoed in his mind. You make them pay for what they did to all those other drivers. This was the graveyard, the place where drivers who said no ended up buried and forgotten. The coroner examined both vehicles and delivered his findings. Male victim in the pickup, execution-style gunshot to the back of the skull. Female victim in the sedan, also shot. These people had been killing anyone who got in their way for years. As the excavation continued, they discovered the drug processing facility was much larger than initially thought. What looked like a small shed was actually part of an underground complex that stretched for hundreds of square feet. Remote location, access to major highways, big enough to process serious weight. When they were done with it, they buried everything. Trucks, bodies, equipment. Made it all disappear like it never existed. Then the coroner found something else. A storage area separate from the processing facility, like an office or records room. Metal file cabinets and waterproof storage containers had been buried alongside everything else. If they kept records of their operation, Hartwell said, invoices, delivery schedules, driver information, we'd have everything we need to identify their network. It took hours to safely extract the storage containers, but what they found inside was damning. Waterlogged documents, plastic-wrapped ledgers, laminated driver's licenses. 15 different licenses from 12 different states, all belonging to truck drivers who'd vanished over the past 5 years. The ledgers told an even grimmer story. Handwritten entries documented drug shipments, delivery routes, and driver assignments. Some entries were marked with a simple X next to the driver's name, the ones who hadn't cooperated. But there was another section that made Danny's blood run cold. Protection costs, with monthly payments listed to various law enforcement agencies. The largest recurring payment was labeled Sheriff Department, $25,000 per month. A corrupt sheriff getting paid to look the other way. That's when Hartwell's phone rang. The conversation was brief and tense, and when she hung up, her face had gone pale. Someone had broken into the evidence locker at the courthouse. Stolen files related to missing person cases. And the corrupt sheriff, a man named Cole Brennan, had left town that morning on personal business with no return date. He was either running or cleaning up loose ends. Danny's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll join your brother." They were being watched, but here's where Danny made a decision that would change everything. Instead of backing down, he pushed forward. If they were watching, maybe they'd make a mistake. The FBI intercepted radio chatter about a truck convoy heading north toward the Canadian border. Multiple vehicles, heavy escort. The operation was trying to relocate. Danny and Hartwell had a 3-hour window to catch them in the open. As they raced north on mountain highways, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The convoy was too organized, too calm for people who knew law enforcement was closing in. "What if this is a decoy?" he said to Hartwell. "What if they're leading us away from something more important?" Before she could answer, the convoy suddenly changed direction, turning east onto a smaller highway that wound deeper into the mountains. Then Danny's phone buzzed again. This time the message included an attachment that made his stomach turn. A grainy photo of Jake on his knees in a concrete room, hands zip-tied behind his back, a gun pressed to the back of his head. They weren't running. They were leading Danny and Hartwell to where they'd killed Jake. The radio crackled with a voice Danny recognized from Jake's recordings. Cold and authoritative. "Too late, Officer Hartwell. You and the brother, you follow the trucks. You come alone, no backup, no FBI, or we start killing the drivers we're holding." They had hostages, other drivers they'd captured over the years. Still alive, still imprisoned somewhere in these mountains. Danny and Hartwell made a choice. They couldn't wait for backup if it meant more people dying. They found an old mining road that approached the convoy's destination from a different direction. Rough terrain, dangerous drop-offs, but it would let them come in from the blind side where they weren't expected. The abandoned mining town of Silver Creek sat in a valley surrounded by rusted equipment and weathered buildings, and parked among the structures were the 6 trucks from the convoy. At least 12 armed men guarded the perimeter, but they were watching the main roads, not the mountain trails. Danny and Hartwell spent an hour crawling through abandoned mining shafts, getting into position. When they finally reached the main building, what they found inside made Danny's rage explode. Chains bolted to walls, concrete floors stained with blood, and a room filled with personal effects. Wallets, driver's licenses, family photos, wedding rings, all sorted into plastic bins like inventory. Jake's wallet was there. Danny recognized it immediately. Inside was everything, including a photo from their last Christmas together. 3 years ago, when everyone was still smiling, still whole, still believing the world was safe. But they'd walked into a trap. 3 armed men rounded the corner, weapons drawn. The leader was the man from Jake's recordings, the one who'd threatened their mother. Danny recognized his voice immediately. "Where is he?" Danny demanded. "Where's Jake?" The man laughed. "You really think your brother's still breathing after 2 years?" The photo they'd sent Danny, the one showing Jake alive, had been taken 2 years ago, right before they killed him. It was just bait to lure Danny in. Rage consumed Danny. He lunged forward, but one of the gunmen hit him with a rifle butt. As Danny went down, gasping for air, the leader explained their plan. They were going to torture Danny for information, find out who else knew about the operation, then kill him just like they'd killed Jake. But in that moment, the lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in, but in those few seconds of darkness, Officer Hartwell moved. 3 quick shots, and 2 gunmen were down. Danny used the chaos to tackle the leader, 2 years of grief and fury channeled into his fists. They fought among the drug processing equipment, and Danny didn't stop until he heard bone crack. "Where did you bury him?" Danny roared. "Where's my brother's body?" The leader, bleeding and broken, finally gave up the location. A canyon 3 miles north of the original burial site. They dumped Jake in a ravine. Danny wanted to crush the man's skull. Every fiber of his being screamed for revenge, but Jake's voice echoed in his memory. Justice, not revenge. Danny zip-tied the leader instead and dragged him out as backup arrived. The entire drug operation collapsed that night, but Danny's mission wasn't over. They drove to the coordinates the prisoner had given them, and there, at the edge of Willow Creek, Danny found the fallen tree split by lightning. He shined his flashlight into the ravine below, and his breath caught. Faded blue denim, boots, scattered bones. Jake had been there the whole time, thrown away like garbage. But as the search and rescue team worked to bring Jake's remains up from the canyon, they found something that broke Danny completely. Carved into the rock face, barely visible under years of weather, were letters scratched with a piece of metal. D-A-N-N-Y. Jake had survived the fall. He'd lived long enough to carve his brother's name into the stone. A final message that said, "I was here, I fought, I didn't give up." Danny pressed his palm against those carved letters and made a promise. "I got them, brother. The people who did this, they're going to pay." The search team recovered 4 victims from that ravine. Jake, Carlos Menendez from Houston, and 2 other drivers. Sheriff Cole Brennan was arrested near the Canadian border trying to destroy evidence. Bank records showed he'd received over $1 million in protection payments over 5 years. Miguel Santos, the cartel lieutenant running the trucking operation, provided details about 23 drivers killed over 5 years. Burial locations across multiple states. Families would finally have answers. The funeral was held in Tyler, Texas, where Jake had lived his whole life. Hundreds of drivers came to pay their respects. The entire trucking community mourned one of their own. Danny stood at the graveside as Jake's remains were lowered into Texas soil, finally home after 2 years in a Montana ravine. Their mother held his arm, her face wet with tears, but peaceful. "He saved so many people," she whispered. "All those other families who will get their answers because of what Jake did." After the service, Danny climbed back into his rig and headed east on Interstate 20. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. His CB radio crackled with Smokestack Joe's voice. Jake's story was spreading across the trucking community. Drivers all over the country were talking about how he'd fought back, how his courage had brought down an entire criminal network. And here's the beautiful part: it was already helping. A driver in New Mexico had been approached with one of those too-good-to-be-true deals, but he remembered Jake's story and called the state police instead. Jake's sacrifice was still protecting people, still saving lives. Danny keyed his mic one final time and broadcast a message on the channel every driver monitored. "This is Longhorn Danny with a message for every independent out there. If someone offers you easy money for questionable cargo, remember Jake Rollins. Remember that some prices are too high to pay." He set the mic aside and drove east into the Texas dawn, carrying his brother's memory and mission forward. The highway stretched ahead, endless and familiar, full of good drivers doing honest work. Jake Rollins had been murdered for refusing to haul drugs, but his story, his evidence, his final message carved into Montana stone had brought down an entire criminal network and saved countless other drivers from the same fate. That's the legacy of a true trucker. someone who'd rather die than betray their principles. So here's my question for you. After hearing this story, would you have the courage to stand up against impossible odds to protect others, even knowing it might cost you everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe, because there are too many stories like Jake's that need to be told. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about real courage on the open road. Thanks for watching, and remember, some people sacrifice everything so others can make it home safely.